So friends, following the discussion on the short story aesthetic, which in the hands of Melville becomes something different, but basically American. He's sharing his views, his comments, his perceptions with the reader, and as Dr. Bajaj pointed out in the previous part of the lecture, he doesn't adhere to the short story as an episode, as a closed kind of an ending or a beginning that is formal, and that he's all the time putting the reader face to face with the reality of his time. So this is a fine perception about the short story in the hands of Herman Melville, and I would request Dr. Bajaj now to discuss the short story that she has picked up in some detail, so that we know how things that have been said so far are borne out by the depiction. So it's in your court now, so please begin.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Prakash. So I was discussing that how Melville, is obviously he's primarily a fiction writer, known for Moby Dick, etc. But even in Moby Dick, if you notice that he's extensively deployed his experiences as a whaler on a ship. So and soon after his father's death in 1832, I mean, he was born in an influential family, but the family's financial condition worsened, and Melville at the age of 14 actually began to work as a clerk in a bank. Now, it was a well-to-do family, but his father went bankrupt first, and then so family faced some problems. But after his father's death, they were in in a kind of a financial crisis. So Melville had to take up these odd jobs, and he worked as a clerk in a bank. And it is in this period that he actually understood the torment of a dull job experience in the very formative years of his life. And these actually found expression in the story Bartleby the Scrivener. Now, Bartleby the Scrivener is just half, the first half of the title. The second half of the title is A Story of Wall Street. So the full title of the story is Bartleby the Scrivener, A Story of Wall Street. Now, both parts are important. So a lot of us really focus on the first part and think of Bartleby the copyist. Basically, the scrivener is someone who copies law documents, etc. So he is making these documents and writing them out. And to focus on just one part of the first half of the title would be really missing the point, because then unless you place it as a story of Wall Street, you will not understand the dimension of how Wall Street has in a way corrupted lives of people. So it is actually a story of Wall Street. Now it depends, again he likes to play with language. So it's Bartleby the Scrivener, A Story of Wall Street. Which is more important? Which is the functional clause here for you? Is it Bartleby? Is it Wall Street? Is it the Scrivener? And who's? So there are three parts to this particular title itself, right? Are we talking about an individual? Are we talking about a job situation of a scrivener? Are we talking about the Wall Street? Whose story is it? Is it the story of all these three, or it is a story of contemporary or 19th century American life? So the story actually projects a culture that at once celebrates the free will, or the free self, but at the same time the powerful joint stock company, which is obviously represented in the Wall Street. Now, the narrator is actually a lawyer at the Wall Street, and Bartleby is employed by him in his own office along with other clerks, right? So Bartleby is employed, and this is a take of the narrator on all these characters who are working under him, and he's the employer. So working in this as a in the law offices, law chambers in Wall Street, what is his view of his own self, of the work that they all do, and of the clerks that he has hired, and what is so special about Bartleby the Scrivener? These are some of the questions that that come to our mind when we read this story. So it is the predicament of the protagonist who's disturbed, but because he appears as a rebellious fool, and at other points he also occurs to comes across as a solitary sort of an ascetic. So he's placed somewhere in between. Bartleby, that is, he is he is seen as a rebellious fool by the narrator, but also seen as a kind of a solitary saint sort of a figure. So how do we place him? The narrator actually observes, right, when he's trying to assess the character of Bartleby, and he says, and this throws light on the story of Wall Street as well. He says, and I quote, "Our happiness courts the light, so we deem the world is gay. But misery hides aloof, so we deem that misery there is none." Unquote. Now, the idea that happiness courts the light, the happiness is always visible. So we deem the world is gay, that the world is all good and it's all beautiful. But misery hides aloof, so we deem that misery there is none. So he turns philosophical in these moments in his assessments. It's his kind of an avocation to assess the clerks who are working under him. It's a kind of a hobby that he does. He begins by saying that I will throw light on what I have observed about people around me. But the fact that Wall Street is all about, the world is gay, and the picture that is provided about the Wall Street, the financial hub of America, the financial markets, the power center of America, it gives you the idea that the world is gay because it's in the light. But misery, which is seen in the shape of Bartleby here, it hides aloof, and you don't see it, so you feel that misery there exists none. So there is a sense of a philosophical take on this particular reality of America at the time, that there is a story of Wall Street which is all gay and beautiful, but there is a misery behind that Wall Street which is captured in the character of Bartleby the Scrivener, and hence the title. Bartleby the Scrivener is the story of misery, but a story of Wall Street is the story which comes in the light and which is all happy, and there is it is optimistic. So this is how I'd like you to look at the title as presenting the shining and the suffering sort of America at the same time. Now, Melville actually captures the moral ambiguity of not just the narrator but also the nation that is poised to claim the future. And what is that moral ambiguity? The moral ambiguity comes from the fact that you want progress, you want to move ahead, but it is coming at the cost of the people who are supposed to make that nation. So the ambiguity comes in whether to crush the people who once came together to declare themselves independent and free and joined in the Declaration of Equality, but there is none now. So the ambiguity, and there is the moral dilemma faced by the narrator himself. He doesn't know whether to chuck Bartleby from the office or not, because Bartleby, who was exceptionally diligent at one point in time, has become a kind of a useless person for him, because his vision is impaired and he's unable to do the job that he was able to do earlier, and he has become willfully rebellious. So the narrator doesn't know what to do with him. He knows that this person really needs the job, and he knows that it'll be a tragedy if he were to let him go, and this person cannot survive, and yet he as an employer, he feels it is necessary for him to let go of such a fellow, because he might have an ill effect on his own in the culture of the office. So there is this sense of moral ambiguity that the narrator faces, but actually if you see it is the moral ambiguity of the nation itself that Melville is trying to point at. What do you think of this, the moral ambiguity of the nation?
No, I really appreciate the point you are making regarding the second part of the title, because when I read it, I didn't think of it, but definitely this is the story about America as it's unfolding in the economic sense, and that this economic sense is at the cost of the person who is Bartleby. So I think it's a good point you're making, and I thought that it would be a story mainly about the mediocrity, as you called it, of the middle classes, but it's more than that. And as you rightly say, the comedy and the tragedy mix so well in the story, and
Right.
that they're so well balanced. So
Right.
I really appreciate your point.
Okay, yeah, right. So, it is the comic, and the comic is also comic very soon turns macabre, but then of course, it is weird and it is absurd that this man refuses to leave the office even when the employer has chucked him, has given him the money, and he refuses to take that money, and he says, I would prefer not to. So that's the kind of a tagline that he is known for in the story. So at the individual level, obviously this is also a contradiction between the rights and the obligations of the individual. How much, what are Bartleby's rights, but what are his obligations? Now the obligations become overwhelming for Bartleby, and he is unable to exercise his rights. The only way he can exercise his right is by saying, telling the employer that I would prefer not to do such this thing or that. But the first reaction of the narrator is to chuck him out of the office, and he's like, how is this fellow so insolent, and he wants to dismiss him straight away. But there is a sense of empathy, and there is a sense of a larger bond that he is able to find in Bartleby, and which is why the narrator finds himself completely helpless and in throwing him out of the office. So because he understands that that the job is absolutely drab, and there is no way anybody can carry on with this. So the narrator actually opens the story in his office space, where he is talking about the three other clerks as well who he has employed, like Turkey, Nippers and Ginger Nut. These are the three people who are already working in his office. He delineates the peculiarities of each before he actually takes up for analysis the eponymous hero. All these three characters, in fact, Turkey, Nippers and Ginger Nut, they are all afflicted by this strange kind of restlessness and a flighty temper. I mean, there are moments when the narrator is actually scared to go and touch one or the other, because Turkey and Nippers seem to have this kind of, Turkey is really, he says in the morning Turkey is all happy, but by the time this clock strikes 12, he begins to become, very grumpy, and then he becomes, he has a flighty temper, and, you don't know what to do with it. So it's in a way suggesting that, as the hours of work, the number of hours that are going in the work, the first 4 hours, Turkey is happy doing the work, but the moment it strikes 12, he's unable to cope with it, and he's unable to, he's angry, and he's all temper, and then by the evening he's lost it and he's become helpless. So you can already see what the number of hours are doing, and he's telling you at each hour how Turkey is behaving. When he comes to Nippers, he says Nippers is really angry when he's coming to the job, but he becomes better over the number of hours that he puts together. So in a way, each character is struggling, each character is as I said, each character is a ticking bomb here, the narrator just maintains the distance, because he knows the moment he pushes them, anytime they're going to burst, and they're going to break. So there is a sense, and Bartleby, when he comes to the office, he becomes the object of scrutiny for the narrator, and particularly his eccentricities. Each character, each clerk here has an eccentricity in itself, but Bartleby is, eccentricities arouse both anger and pity in the narrator, because in the beginning, when Bartleby joins the office, he's steadfastly loyal and diligent in his work. He is the first to arrive in the office and the last to leave. He continuously works, and in fact, the narrator says if he were a bit more cheerful, he would have preferred such a person, but he's silent, he's pale, and he's mechanical. So silent again is something that keeps coming back as a term that defines Bartleby, even when he's put in jail because he refuses to leave the law premises, and he's put behind jail by the new owner of the of the floor of the chambers. He's put in jail, and even there people address him as the silent man. So silence is used again as a language. I was talking about how Melville makes use of language and experiments with language and uses alternate ways of speaking through gestures, through phrases and half sentences. And here silence in itself becomes a kind of a point of irritation for the narrator but also for the reader, because the reader is not able to guess why Bartleby is rebelling. But again, if you just read the second part of the title, A Story of Wall Street, you will know why Bartleby is rebelling, why Bartleby is silent, why he's going pale every day, and why the mechanical life that he is a part of has done this to him. So after a few weeks, he decides to refuse errands that his employer asks him to do. That his employer, that is the narrator, and the only thing that he says to things other than his actual job, when he's copying, he does the copying work, but he refuses to run other errands for the narrator, and he simply says, I would prefer not to. So I would prefer not to, in fact, becomes a phrase that creates humor among other characters who seem to then, and finally, the narrator says that it has rubbed on me. This fellow is a demented fellow, and he has had a serious effect on my mental health. And he says that, in fact, all the other people have begun to use the word prefer. I would prefer not to, I would prefer to do this, I think he prefers to do that. So all of them begin to use a word that initially was the joke for them vis-a-vis Bartleby. But we also know that in the background, it is the truth is, and this is what the narrator also says, that he has been diligently copying law documents by the dim window where there is no light. You see, when the office space is described, we realize there is nothing, it overlooks nothing, there are just walls that bar. I mean, think of this metaphor, that there is a window, and outside the window there is a tall black wall, right? That's what is the view of the window. So there is no sunshine, there is no light, right? It's almost like you're working underground, you're working in the mines, you're working, you're never face to light, because there are tall buildings next to you, and you're in one of the chambers. So the view from the window is just a black wall, and Bartleby constantly just keeps facing, he refuses to talk to people, there is a complete disconnect with other people in the office, and he only faces the wall all the time. He's always facing the black wall outside the window. So, the view outside the window is in itself metaphorical, and it keeps returning as a symbol of this kind of effect of capitalism, I would say, on the lives of people. Finally, working alongside by this dim window, it leaves his vision impaired. He's no more able to see the document that he's working on, and no more able to copy documents. And finally, he decides that he will not copy anymore, and he refuses to do any work in the office, and he just keeps looking out of the window facing the black wall. So that's all he does. So much so that it creates a sort of a rumor around the office, and and goes negatively for the narrator, everybody seems to be talking about this strange creature who is in the office of the narrator and who does no work. So he's referred to as the strange creature. Again, if you notice, from a human being, he's being dehumanized. He's been seen as no more human, because he's unreasonable, and there is no rational answer that he can give to anyone. Now again, it puts into question the whole idea of rationality. What narrators, or what the discourse of Wall Street would find reasonable is not reasonable otherwise, right? So if Bartleby refuses to work and exercises his free will, it is seen as unreasonable, right? Because the discourse of the Wall Street is one where you're supposed to work, and if you're not working, then you're being unreasonable. And if you're exercising your free will to say, no, I would prefer not to do something, then you're being unreasonable. So how certain ideas become assumptions and turn into things that we no more question. So working in an office for a number of hours is accepted, but because Bartleby refuses to do so, he is unreasonable. He's being looked at as a strange person who doesn't want to work. If he's exercising his free will, then he's seen as someone who is demented. So how ideas that don't go well with the discourse of the Wall Street, and by that I mean the discourse of capitalism, they are seen as strange, mad, unreasonable, etc. So there is Bartleby, and then there is the discourse of the Wall Street. What do you think?
No, you see, this is the basic point that you're making, and it really makes sense. the story starts with a kind of optimism, starts with a kind of illusion, and then it's inexorably moves towards a kind of crisis. And towards the end, there's a total crisis. Things were working so hard and so fast in the beginning, but towards the end, there is a stalemate.
Right.
So, do you think it's a journey from the capitalism's optimism in the beginning and the bright light that it gives to a kind of darkness that is also symbolized by the story?
Yes, I think, and that is what I meant by the contrary. So there is this kind of an optimism and bright light which America had, the vision that it had for itself at the turn of the century. And by the time you reached 1850s, and this story is written in 1853, again it was serialized in one of the journals. So in 1853, it is serialized in journals. So by this time, already that it has waned off. That kind of sense of optimism and that sense of I think that sense of pride or that sense of potentiality in this movement, because industrialization has made life mechanical and drab for the large chunk of people, for the ordinary people. And this is also the phase of JP Morgans and Rockefellers, etc., the bankers who are making money in real estate, and there are big bankers around. So already there is the gap between the rich and the poor has increased. Already there is a large chunk of the population that is reeling under privation and this kind of misery. And on the other hand, those who are making money and those who are in favor of this kind of greed or this kind of wealth making mechanism.
One question. You see, there are three characters, you say, who are all employees, and they appear different from one another. But isn't there a kind of parallel existence that they live, and finally they converge on something that is depressing?
Yes, of course. All of them, in fact, because this is a short story, I said, so there is not much space provided to each of these characters. But the beginning of the story is entirely focused on these characters, and they all have their idiosyncrasies and eccentricities. Now, these could be seen as humorous, as just personal, tendencies or proclivities in a person. But I think it is to do with, the lives that they are dealing with. For instance, Turkey, we are told, is someone who is always, who's middle-aged, who's moving towards who's the same age as the narrator, and he is now unable to cope with this kind of life. He reminded me of The Death of a Salesman, for instance, of Arthur Miller. Somebody who has reached a point in life who's no more able to do the kind of work that he could do earlier, and the narrator wants to chuck him out, wants to be rid of him, but he refuses to leave because he wants to still continue with the job. So there is a sense that your body is failing, but the work expected from you is the same. So how to accommodate that? And Nippers tells the narrator, he keeps spilling the blue ink, but actually his papers are all in red ink. Now red ink again refers to American mortgages that they were a part of. So the kind of mortgage that he had to pay, and he is still in debt, that he has to pay for the debts that he has taken. So the reference to red ink immediately brings in the parallel with the blue ink that he keeps spilling on the paper, right? Because he is living a life in debt. So these are some of the ways in which all these characters are projected, but actually all of them find their realization in Bartleby, because Bartleby is no different than all these characters.
Friends, Dr. Richa Bajaj has told us about the short story, particularly Bartleby the Scrivener, and it's a story about the Wall Street also. So I think the way she has presented it makes a great deal of sense that America is moving from the progressive phase to the critical phase, and towards the end one doesn't know where to go. And this is a story, that is highly realistic in its own way, even though it has poetic, suggestive, symbolical dimensions. So I believe this lecture that way reveals a lot about the story, and not only about the story, but about the American writer and about America, the country. Thank you.